Look around you right now. Everything you can see, everything you can touch, your own body, the stars burning overhead, every mountain and ocean on this planet, all of it is a mathematical mistake. The strictest laws of physics say you should not exist. When the universe was born in that incomprehensible explosion of energy we call the Big Bang, the equations governing reality were absolute and perfectly balanced. For every particle of matter that emerged from the void, an identical particle with completely inverted properties had to be created alongside it. We call it antimatter, a perfect cosmic scale. But here is the paradox that keeps theoretical physicists awake at night, the one that almost nobody explains to you clearly. Matter and antimatter cannot share the same space. The moment they meet, they annihilate each other completely, vanishing forever and converting into pure light. Zero, nothing. The entire universe should have consumed itself within the very first fraction of a second of its existence, leaving everything cold, dark, and empty. And yet the universe is here. I am here talking to you, built from solid matter. And there you are, built from exactly the same stuff. So where did the other half of creation go? Where is an entire universe worth of antimatter hiding? I will be direct with you. Many physicists take the easy and intellectually lazy way out. They tell you there was a tiny accidental imbalance, a slight casual asymmetry that luckily left behind just a little more matter than antimatter after the great fire burned out. A cosmic rounding error, they call it. I refuse to accept that kind of intellectual weakness. Pure mathematics pushes us toward a conclusion that is far more extreme and far more disturbing. If you are someone who demands the uncomfortable truth rather than the comfortable explanation, stay with me. Today we are going to shatter the mirror of reality and find the universe they have been hiding from you. To understand the cosmic crime we are investigating, you first need to understand the weapon. And for that, we have to go back nearly a century, to the year 1928. Modern physics had, unfortunately, already begun turning into a race of technicians building enormous machines to smash things together in search of small answers. But true elegance lives in pure thought, in reasoning and mathematics. That is exactly where Paul Dirac, a man of very few words but overwhelming brilliance, noticed something that should have terrified everyone around him. He did not look through a telescope. He did not collide particles. He was working at a blackboard with the fundamental equations that describe electrons, and he encountered a mathematical peculiarity that most mediocre scientists would have conveniently ignored. His perfect equation had two valid answers. Think of it this way. If someone asks you what number multiplied by itself gives you 4, you can say 2 and be correct. But you can also say -2 and be just as mathematically correct. Dirac realized that our universe operated on that same strange and deep duality. The mathematics demanded an unbreakable mirror woven into the very fabric of reality. For every piece of solid matter that exists, for every particle carrying an electric charge, nature forces you to accept the existence of a ghost twin, a particle identical in mass, identical in spin, but with its electrical charge completely reversed. If you have a negative electron, the universe must also contain a positive positron. That is what we now call antimatter. And here is the golden rule, the law of quantum conservation that absolutely nothing in the cosmos can escape. Pure energy does not create matter from nothing without always paying the strict price of symmetry. When cosmic energy condenses and materializes, it always creates the complete pair in a single event, matter and its reflection, one-to-one, without exception. The second part of this fundamental rule is what leads us directly to the cosmic disaster we are trying to unravel. If those two opposite particles ever come into contact, if your negative electron meets its positive positron face to face, what follows is a devastating, immediate, and mathematically perfect annihilation. Both particles stop existing in an instant. They vanish from material reality and transform back into a pure flash of light, into photons, 100% efficiency in their own destruction. No quantum dust remains, no physical debris survives. The final balance on the universe's ledger returns to exactly zero. Now apply that iron logic to the beginning of everything, to the first moment of the Big Bang. The infant universe was nothing like the vast, cold, and dark space you observe on a clear night. It was an incomprehensible inferno of lethal condensed energy, so hot and so impossibly dense that this primordial energy was constantly crystallizing, producing billions upon billions of particle and antiparticle pairs. Matter and antimatter were being born together, inevitably, in every fraction of every millionth of a second. It was a fierce and perfectly symmetrical dance of creation and annihilation, happening simultaneously, total equilibrium through mutual destruction. But follow my reasoning closely, because this is precisely where reality seems to collapse on itself. As that primitive universe expanded outward, its temperature inevitably dropped. As it cooled dramatically, That original furnace lost the energetic force needed to keep generating those twin pairs from the void. The music of creation stopped completely. And the only thing strict logic allows, the only outcome that should have followed, is that all the residual matter and all the residual antimatter began colliding massively in the darkness. Every material particle eventually found its mirror image killer. They embraced violently and erased each other from existence forever, generating light, more light, and nothing but an infinite sea of light. If the fundamental equations of quantum creation are as symmetrical and unbreakable as we know them to be, the final result of the Big Bang should have been a sterile desert of radiation drifting through nothingness. Not a single atom should have survived the massacre. 0 galaxies, 0 stars, 0 cosmic dust to form planets, and under any rational line of reasoning, you should not be here today, breathing, existing, or processing this information. But open your eyes. Here we are. Our universe is not a dead ocean of empty light. It is packed with solid rock, giant stars, and complex chemistry. Every gram we can detect, all the way to the darkest edges of the cosmological horizon, is ordinary matter. Pure, simple, unremarkable matter. For decades, we have scanned deep space desperately searching for the unmistakable burst of gamma rays that would result from even a small cloud of antimatter gas colliding with matter somewhere in the cosmos. And our instruments always return the same deafening silence. The entire observable universe is a scandalous and absolute monologue of matter. Mathematical symmetry was violated without mercy at the dawn of time. Something or someone loaded the dice in the first fraction of a second of cosmic existence to allow you to live. The question has to be eating at your mind right now. If the rule is absolute, if creating light means creating shadow in the exact same proportion, where in the universe has the entire other half of creation hidden itself? Where is the lost antimatter? Listen carefully, because this is where the scientific community tends to sweep its mess under the rug. When physicists first confronted this logical apocalypse, the realization that an expanding universe should be completely empty, they panicked. They began desperately searching for a crack in that perfect mirror, an empirical flaw in the mathematics of creation. They needed to prove that nature, deep in its core, preferred ordinary matter over its dark twin. In 1964, they believed they had found their lifeline. Two physicists analyzed an extremely unstable subatomic particle known as the kaon. This particle has a fascinating and almost schizophrenic behavior. It constantly transforms itself, shifting from matter to antimatter and back again in a thermal oscillation that should be mathematically identical in both directions. It should spend exactly 50% of its time in each state. But the detectors revealed something unsettling. There was a tiny stutter in this quantum pendulum. The kaon preferred to decay as matter with a very slightly higher frequency than as antimatter. This phenomenon was named the violation of charge parity symmetry. In plain terms, nature appeared to have a favorite side. Traditional physics exhaled in relief, and the entire academic establishment applauded. They constructed a very convenient narrative. They claimed that at the infernal instant of the Big Bang, because of this tiny quantum defect, for every 10 billion antiparticles, the universe created exactly 10 billion and 1 particles of matter. When space cooled, the great inescapable massacre followed. The 10 billion matched pairs annihilated each other, flooding the early cosmos with light. But that single extra particle, that tiny lonely orphan, survived simply because it had no dark partner to destroy it with. Every one of those surviving particles, they tell you, gradually gathered over billions of years to form cosmic dust, solar systems, the Earth, and the blood running through your veins. A simple lucky rounding error gave us existence. But I demand that you stop being naive and refuse to settle for mediocrity. Look at the real numbers. When we calculate the precise magnitude of this symmetry violation in the most advanced laboratories operating today and extrapolate it mathematically back to the infinite heat of the Big Bang, the result is a complete and total humiliation for that theory. The imbalance we have actually measured is ridiculously small, billions of times too weak to explain the colossal quantity of matter that makes up our observable universe. It is like trying to explain the flooding of an entire continent by pointing to a dripping pipe in a basement. The pure mathematics simply does not fit, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to protect their reputation. This is why I tell you, the mystery was never resolved. It only became deeper and far more frightening. The equations of general relativity and quantum mechanics continue insisting unanimously that we are missing exactly half the total weight of existence. If the physical laws we know were not sufficient to have destroyed the antimatter, then only one deductive conclusion remains. The antimatter was never destroyed. It is still out there, completely intact. The vast majority of science communicators lack the intellectual honesty to tell you this openly, because they are terrified of admitting that our model for the origin of everything is broken. But if you are someone who demands to look directly into the abyss of real numbers, someone who categorically refuses to accept the cosmic fairy tales sold by textbooks, then stay here. We now face an absolute logical wall. If a massive universe of antimatter formed at the exact same instant as ours, and we know with certainty that they did not fully annihilate each other, then by pure logic they should still be coexisting somewhere. But we already established the unbreakable rule of annihilation. We cannot have galaxies of antimatter drifting peacefully alongside ours, because at the vast boundaries where their gas would brush against ours, we would witness a colossal inferno of gamma radiation that would blind every telescope we have ever built. And we see absolutely none of that. The dark sky is completely calm. The only physically and logically possible way for both to exist without destroying one another is if they never touch. Never. But how do you separate two infinite and explosive entities born at exactly the same infinitesimal point in space and at exactly the same instant in time? Think carefully about that. How do you divide gunpowder and fire in the exact millisecond of the detonation? The answer to this question will fracture your very notion of what is real. To resolve the paradox of how matter and antimatter avoided mutual destruction in the first instant of creation, you must first purge your mind of a monumental conceptual error. Most people imagine the Big Bang as something like a grenade exploding inside a vast dark room. They picture matter flying off to the left and antimatter shooting off to the right. That mental image is mathematically absurd and logically impossible. At absolute time zero, there was no left and no right. There was no empty space to hide in. Space itself was compressed into a singular point of literally infinite density. If both elements had tried to exist and expand within that same embryonic spatial fabric, they would have made contact immediately and annihilated without exception. The definitive separation between the two universes, therefore, could never have occurred in physical space. To understand what actually happened, we must turn to the only tool in this cosmos that never lies the mathematics of symmetry. There exists an absolute theorem in particle physics, a non-negotiable pillar upon which our entire deep understanding of reality rests. It is called charge parity time symmetry. Here is what it means stated plainly. If you take any physical process whatsoever, reverse the electrical charges of all its particles, then flip their physical positions as though you were looking at them through a perfect mirror, and finally make the clock run in reverse, the resulting system will operate under exactly the same laws as ours. Zero discrepancies. And here is where the brilliant mind of Richard Feynman, one of the few colleagues who truly listened to what his own equations were shouting at him, demolished our traditional intuition entirely. He demonstrated algebraically something that lesser minds prefer to ignore. An antimatter particle, say a positively charged electron moving normally toward the future, is mathematically and empirically identical to an ordinary matter particle moving toward the chronological past. Take a moment to absorb the full destructive weight of what I just told you. Stop thinking of antimatter as something exotic, as alien fuel or a magical substance. That is another fantasy for weak minds. Antimatter is simply ordinary matter whose internal clock is running in the opposite direction to the arrow of time in our universe. It is, by its strictest definition, the mirror of time. Now take this unbreakable logic and apply it to the most violent event of all. Look the Big Bang directly in the face once more. That event was not simply the origin of space or the birth of hot energy. It was the violent ignition point of chronological structure itself, the beginning of time. If you represent time as a geometric line, the Big Bang is the absolute 0 point. We, our universe, the Earth, every observable galaxy, and every biological cell in your body were born at that 0 point and pushed relentlessly in one single direction along that line, toward what we organically perceive as the future. Things age, space expands, entropy increases, but the fundamental balance of the quantum universe demands its tribute. The universe did not make a rounding error to allow your existence. It created exactly the same colossal quantity of matter and antimatter at that 0 point. The difference is that the gunpowder and the fire never touched, because they did not travel in the same chronological dimension. In the exact millisecond that our matter universe was ejected from the singularity toward the temporal future, the entire universe of antimatter infinite, with its perfect and complete mass, was simultaneously ejected from that same origin point toward our absolute past. It is not floating behind some dark galaxy. It is on the other side of creation itself, expanding in perpetual temporal reversal, separated from us by the unbreakable wall of time zero. Now I need to stop and warn you about something important. I have spent decades training my mind to operate outside the comfortable illusions built into human thinking. Your brain evolved strictly to survive, to hunt, to gather, to avoid predators. It was not built to process the true geometric topology of space and time. So when you hear that an entire universe identical to ours exists but is moving toward the chronological past, your first instinctive reaction is to picture something completely absurd. You probably imagine shattered coffee cups leaping off the floor and reassembling themselves on a table, raindrops climbing upward from mud back into clouds, wrinkled elderly people slowly growing young until they become newborns. I am asking you to erase that ridiculous image from your mind immediately. That is cheap science fiction thinking. It is not rigorous analytical physics, and I refuse to treat you like a child. So let us reason through this with the cold, implacable precision that pure science demands. To understand the true mental collapse this cosmic revelation implies, you first need to understand what time actually is. Physics does not have a master clock hidden at the center of the cosmos dictating the rhythm of the hours. The flow of time, that arrow you feel constantly pushing you forward, is governed by a single dictatorial and unbreakable law. The second law of thermodynamics, entropy. The entire universe, without a single exception, always moves from a state of extreme order toward a state of disorder, dispersion, and absolute chaos. Structures break down, thermal energy dissipates. That inevitable increase of chaos is precisely what you and I organically perceive as the passage toward the future. Apply that iron logic without hesitation. The Big Bang, that expansive detonation of hot plasma, was the state of maximum density, maximum simplicity, and maximum possible thermodynamic order in the entire cosmological structure. It was the absolute entropic anchor of all existence. Our own matter universe was fired away from that point of immense order. It continues expanding, continues cooling, and continues generating greater chaos with every passing second. That, and only that, is why our clock moves forward. But remember the perfect mirror of mathematical symmetry we discussed earlier. That enormous twin universe forged entirely from antimatter was born at that same exact point of extreme order, absolute time zero, and just like us, it was violently ejected away from that central point of origin. Its spatial fabric is also expanding without restraint. Its primordial energy is also cooling. Its level of entropy and statistical disorder also increases constantly as it moves away from the furnace of the Big Bang. You are beginning to understand what the mathematics are screaming directly at you. The thermodynamic arrow of time in that antimatter universe points away from the origin exactly as it does in ours. For any biological or conscious entity built from anticarbon and breathing antioxygen in that cosmological mirror, their perception of reality is identical to yours. For them, massive antimatter stars are also born through gravitational collapse and die exploding in supernovae. For them, a glass of water also spills and never spontaneously returns to its original state. Their clock runs smoothly and perfectly toward what they call their future, because the inevitable increase of cosmic chaos drags them relentlessly along their own isolated timeline. And here is the exact moment where your classical understanding of reality must fracture completely. There is no absolute past or absolute future in the vast architecture of the cosmic plane. There is only thermodynamic distance moving away from the great initial singularity. If you possess the divine ability to peer over the burning frontier of the Big Bang and look directly into that symmetrical abyss, you would see them moving backward in time, composed of a lethal and incomprehensible substance. But apply without fear the empirical principle of quantum relativity. If an antimatter analyst in that universe were observing you through that same frontier at this precise moment, for their perfect equations, for their detectors, and for their physical rigor, you are the grotesque anomaly. For them, you are constructed from aberrant antimatter. For them, your clock is the one running in an unnatural direction. According to their undeniable mathematical calculations, their world of antimatter is the established norm, and our material universe is the bizarre defect. Both sides are entirely correct. Neither is wrong. And because of the brutal geometry of time, both universes are mathematically condemned to never cross paths throughout all of eternity. If your intellect has not experienced genuine vertigo from this revelation, it is because you have not yet internalized the full magnitude of the problem. This is how the raw beauty of the real cosmos operates, completely stripped of human sentimentalism and false comfort. We have now solved in an elegant way where the missing universe concealed itself. We have located it behind an infinite and impenetrable chronological wall. But I warned you at the beginning that fundamental physics is brutal and always leaves empirical traces. A simultaneous detonation of two complete and massive universes could not have occurred in absolute vacuum without generating tectonic consequences. If we are sufficiently meticulous, we should be able to detect the fossilized scars that the violent birth of that anti-cosmos left imprinted in the background radiation of our own space. The mediocre physicists will tell you it is impossible to prove the existence of this mirror universe because, as we have established, it lies on the other side of the impenetrable barrier of time zero. They will tell you that light cannot travel backward in time to bring us a photograph. And they are correct about that. Light is trapped within our own temporal and spatial current. But light is not the supreme force of this cosmos. Gravity is. Gravity is not a simple electromagnetic attractive force. It is the actual deformation of the fabric of reality, the pure geometry of space and time interact. And when the matter universe and the antimatter universe were torn brutally apart at the exact instant of creation, that simultaneous separation was not a quiet or gentle event. It was the most violent and massive geometric rupture imaginable. That monumental tearing had to send gravitational shockwaves of inconceivable magnitude rippling through the entire structure of existence across both sides of the temporal boundary. We have a detailed map of the primitive universe. We call it the cosmic microwave background. It is the fossilized thermal glow imprinted in the void when our universe cooled enough to allow light to travel freely for the first time, roughly 380,000 years after the initial explosion. For decades, we have sent extraordinarily expensive satellites into deep space to scan and record that first light. And the modern textbooks assure you that this radiation is perfectly uniform, a sea of boringly predictable temperature that fits neatly with the most reassuring standard theories. But they are hiding the most uncomfortable part of the data from you. When those of us who actually analyze the complex and unfiltered mathematics behind those maps look closely, we find undeniable anomalies. There are enormous patches of abnormal temperature that should not exist under any traditional framework. There are perfect concentric rings of energy that openly defy any standard statistical explanation. The orthodox scientific community clings to inflation theory, a highly artificial and aesthetically ugly mathematical patch invented in the 1980s to try to sweep these defects under the carpet. They want to convince you that these features are mere random fluctuations, irrelevant coincidences, simple quantum background noise. I categorically refuse to accept that intellectual cowardice. Those anomalies are too precise, too colossal, and too geometrically structured to be simple statistical accidents. They are scarce. They are the fossil imprint of the immense gravitational fluctuations generated by our twin universe at the exact moment when both realities separated at the singularity. While our matter and its antimatter were being chronologically repelled at time zero, the incalculable inertia of that double mass deformed the very topology of their shared origin point. What we are seeing printed in our most ancient sky, if you have the courage to read the mathematics correctly, is the fingerprint of the universe we lost. It is the gravitational echo of billions of antimatter galaxies racing toward the eternal past.